Hi, welcome to Creative View of Pacific Fabrics. I'm Erin Hubner, and today we are talking about making a beautiful silk pillowcase. This is a wonderful project and gift for either yourself or someone you care about. It's great for the skin and the hair and will make sleeping so much better and more comfortable, which is wonderful, especially this time of year and just this year in general. We're going to use some specialty tools while working with silk, and we're also going to learn a new skill of making a beautiful French seam that will make everything stronger and much more durable, especially, makes it look a little bit nicer and more luxurious as well. We're going to be using beautiful silk charmeuse. It's important to use a nice smooth silk because that is what is going to make everything feel so nice and soft. So you want to avoid the dupiones for a project like this. We're also going to make sure that we're using an actual silk fabric and not something that says satin, which may be silk or it may be polyester. And where you really get the benefits is from the actual silk fabric itself. So what we're going to be doing is, for this project, we're going to have our silk. We're going to be cutting that with our Kai rotary cutter or scissors. It's super important, as silk charmeuse likes to slip and slide around, that you are getting an actual straight cut. We're going to be using Microtex needles. When you use a fine fiber, you need to make sure you use a much slimmer and finer needle as well, which we will also be using in pins. We don't want to make sure we are punching giant holes in our fabric as we work. Little highlights about the pillow is it is finished on each side with a double folded hem. It has an envelope enclosure. This is important because you can use either side of the pillow. They're both going to be equally soft. With this, you don't actually, unless you pick it up like this, you don't see your white pillowcase in it. And again, the French seams will make it extra strong and also have that beautiful finish on the edge. Where all the details are in our project sheet for this However, today we are going to be going step by step on how to do that French seam. It's a little bit tricky, especially when working with a fine fabric such as silk charmeuse. One thing that's important when working with a very fine fabric is that you use a slightly shorter stitch length. So instead of the traditional 2.5, I actually have it down to 2.0 millimeters because I'm using a fine fabric, fine needle. We want those to be a little bit smaller. One of the important things, and this is the easiest way to mess up a French seam, is we actually start our first stitch with the wrong sides of the fabric together. So whatever you want your outside of your fabric to be for this point, it's the shiny side. I'm actually going to start with that up. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to line up my presser foot on that 1/4 inch, put my needle down, I'm going to back stitch. And now I'm going to sew. Sometimes when I'm using very fine fabrics to make it easier, I actually like to put my pins so they're parallel to my seam. That way I don't have to stop each time to take them out, because sometimes that can create a little wobble in your stitch line. Plus it's also a little bit faster. I'm just going to do all down my side like this. So now that I have my entire seam finished, what I'm doing is I'm just very carefully cutting my seam allowance in half. You can see my line of stitching extremely well because I did it in white, so you can see it. Yours will obviously match your fabric, so it'll blend in. And the reason we trim it is so that when we do our next seam, we don't have any of the edges of our fabric sticking out like little eyelashes. Now, what I'll do is I'll take it over to my iron. I'll press my seam to set my stitches, and then on my next step, I'm going to be folding it. So now I've got the wrong side of the fabric facing me. I'm just gonna press that seam down like that so it's nice and flat. Once I have done that, I will take it back to my machine, and I'm going to be lining it up and doing another 1/4 inch seam, back stitching. One thing I like about this is now that you have your line of stitching in there, you can just hold that, and that will help make it be nice and straight as you sew. once you have finished all that, that is when we end up with our final finish, just like that. As you can see, it's very nicely finished on the inside. You don't see any raw edges. And then when we open it up, you don't see any of the raw edges there. I know French seams can seem intimidating, especially once you add silk into the mix, but as long as you go slow and take your time, you're not going to have very many problems. It also helps that these are straight lines, so that also will make it a little bit easier if it is your first time. That after seeing all that step-by-step process on the French seam, they're not going to be as intimidating, and they end up giving you a beautiful finish on your silk pillowcase. As a reminder, on the project sheet, we have all the instructions, including how to do the French seam, what our hem distance is going to be on everything, and then all you have to do is grab some silk and you can make yourself and everyone you know a beautiful silk pillowcase. Thank you for joining Creative View of Pacific Fabrics.